Welcome to the CTO2CTO podcast, where Chief Technology Officers dig into the challenges and opportunities that leaders face every day at the intersection of business and innovation. I'm your host, Lucas Hendrich, CTO at Forte Group.
And Jason, it's wonderful having you here. I think the audience will know a bit about you just from your bio. I think one thing that is known is that you're the CIO of a holding company, car group. Is that the right way to describe it? And the first question is, we see the car or the vehicle industry evolving very quickly right before our eyes. Pretty soon in Austin, Texas, you'll be able to take a Tesla robo-taxi. How are you thinking about this? How is Car Group thinking about this in terms of kind of the future of how you're going to engage, your market, and how you're going to incorporate, let's say, that revolution into your market?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, I wrote a blog many moons ago now on autonomous vehicles and what that will potentially have in terms of impact for the industry. And I still believe to this day that it's the taxis, that the Ubers and Didis and the likes will be impacted the most, and heavy transport, right? So long haul trucking and the likes, where you've got a human element in the loop, and you want your vehicles to be maximizing the value that they're generating for your business, and you either have multiple drivers to have a vehicle operating 24/7. You think of the airline industry, they have their aircraft in the air as much as they can, because there's a saying in aviation that if the prop's not spinning, the cash is burning. So you've got to really maximize the value, and I think that's where autonomous will play the biggest part initially. I think people will still want car ownership, whether the car drives itself or not. That'll still play a role for some time to come. And I mean, I spoke about 5+ years ago, and I don't think a lot has changed in the last 5 years. Regulations are slowly catching up, all of that sort of stuff. But at Car Group, we're obviously always looking at what's happening in the mobility space. What's our role in the future, and how will we be relevant and be a part of that? And so that's constantly in our ethos. Our culture is a degree of healthy paranoia. So we're always on the lookout for where industry might turn and what path we should take. So it's exciting.
You bring up an interesting point, which I think is, and it's actually kind of an interesting way to think about it. Autonomous vehicles really will serve the purpose of optimization, but the reason why people own vehicles is myriad. And a good friend of mine who is a motorcycle enthusiast. When I told him I have an electric a moped that kind of looks like a Vespa. It's not a Vespa. It's similar. And he just found it funny. He said, "That's not why you have a motorcycle. You have a motorcycle so you can make some noise with it, and that's a combustion engine. That's the aesthetic. That's the vibe, if you will." So in a more optimized world, maybe it just means that autonomous vehicles will remove humans from the loop, where really humans aren't optimizing, but that has no business in the world of human preferences. What do you think about that?
So you raised a good point, because I look at my vehicles, right? They're certainly not optimized. Absolutely not. And, I don't do a lot of kilometers every year, but yet I will maintain ownership of a vehicle. Why? Because I like to go down to the garage. I like to get in the car, and I actually like to drive it. I actually enjoy it. It's almost a part of my own identity is the ability to drive a vehicle or ride a motorcycle, right? And I don't think I'd ever want to give that up. I'm 50 this year, or probably the later half of my life, I guess, and all of that sort of stuff. But I'm excited to see where the technology is going. But I'm not going to give away that that excitement that I also get from, my past and the things that I've grown up with. And that may change. Generations may come along and they've never owned a car, and they'll never think of owning a car or a motorcycle or an RV or anything like that, or a boat. They'll always just hire it. So, or use it in some other more efficient way, right? But that's, we're probably a few generations away from that. So we'll see.
Yeah,
see where.
I'd agree. Change always feels fast and then takes, it's always incremental. It's slower to actually adopt. The last question I have on the topic though is there must be some components of the EV market, the broad EV market. So whether it's an EV, whether it's a vehicle, personal vehicle, a motorcycle, or even a boat, that must be changing something in terms of, or maybe it's not a huge impact. The same way that, a Tesla factory is really a completely different factory than, let's say, a Ford factory that has to be retrofitted for EVs. So is there any retrofitting around EVs and their sale through the different sites, or is it pretty much parts or parts?
Oh, no, I think that there's a special place for EVs. It's a particular market. It's almost a subset of a broader market, EV. So there are some special nuances associated with it. The demographic is obviously environmentally conscious, although we are seeing, EVs being purchased by people who are looking for convenience as much as the environmental aspects as well. I mean, around town, an EV is great. In the city, stop-start traffic, you'd want an EV any day of the week. It's just far more efficient and easier, less wear and tear. So it'd be a perfect figure for efficiency, I guess, in that regard. Yeah, I genuinely think it's a slightly different market, it's a subset, and we sort of try and cater for that across our sites. And we're certainly doing a lot more to improve that. There's a lot of entrants here in Australia. There's a lot of entrants entering from China. So there's all new brands that are sprouted up, and they're really quite amazing vehicles. They're really sort of turning up the innovation stakes. So I think traditional manufacturers are playing catch up in some respects, and we'll just see how that plays out as well. But we'll try and cater for it too, within our marketplaces. Yeah. Because we're here to make buying and selling a great experience. So, as new entrant into the market and new product comes across, then we will focus on delivering outcomes for our customers.
So that also makes me think that it's very important to note that you're in Australia, I'm in the United States, and our views on this are so shaped by the markets we're in and how vastly different they are. I was in Thailand last year and got exposed to a lot of the same vehicles, both cars and motorcycles that were coming out of China. And it is a whole new world. And there's a whole new set of preferences to choose from in that regard. So it's very interesting. We could probably spend an hour just talking about that. But my last question, I promised the last on the topic, just out of curiosity, what inefficient yet fun vehicles do you own? If you don't mind sharing.
Okay. I'm probably one of the worst. I have to buy books with trees on it to count with my carbon emissions. So I'm an SUV lover. I like a larger vehicle. I mean, I'm a grandfather, so I have grandchildren that I like to carry around. So 7-seaters are my sort of poison, I guess. And I'll croaker, or fart cars. So I own a Jaguar and I also own a Land Rover. So they're both in the family. And so I'm not the most fuel efficient, but like I say, I actually do very few kilometers each year because I live in the city here in Melbourne and use public transport where I can. So I try and offset the size of the vehicles that I own by utilising public transport where I can.
Yeah, no, that's great and fair, and it's funny. The having a 7-seater, I think, is still a challenge in our market. It's a challenge, and I've recently moved to a Tesla in the past year, precisely because my kids, got past the age where they'd want to bring 3 or 4 of their friends. Prior to that, we had a 7-seater that was like a school bus. So you're a CIO currently. You've been a CTO, and just to kind of frame the question a bit, one of the intents of this podcast is hopefully to illuminate the broader business audience on what does it mean to be a CTO, or what does it mean to be a CIO? What role do we play? And it really varies significantly based on the size of the company. Obviously, being a founder CTO is totally different from being an enterprise CTO. And the CIO role, I think, is evolving. In some cases, it's more aligned with the CISO role. In some cases, it is the CTO, but sort of at a enterprise level when you might be managing several units. So I'm just curious. We could kind of go a couple ways with the question. One is your journey from CTO to CIO, what you brought to CIO, and then what is the CIO for you right now? What role does it play?
Okay, so I'll start with my journey at Car Group because it's probably shapes the answer to the question. So I look at it as sort of 5-year chunks. The first 5 years, we were in one data center. We had no international expansion. We weren't in the cloud. I mean, AWS wasn't even here in Australia at the time. They were still constructing their presence. And so the first 5 years was really about and it was all about the technology, right? It was how do we get out of the data center into the cloud and prepare ourselves for basically our international expansion, right? So in many respects, the CTO role in that aspect was about the technology. It was really how do we deliver performance, scale, the product capability for our customers, right? The next 5 years was, we're now in the cloud, and we're now thinking about how do we globalize it. Now, that was realistically at the point where I transitioned from CTO to CIO. Because I took on the role, and you mentioned it, CISO, I took on cyber and, risk management and governance, as well as the focus on the technology. Now, interestingly, we didn't replace the CTO. Like, I just took on the title of CIO. I continued in my old role, and I also took on additional aspects, which was, cyber and the like. And I think largely that's, the difference is it's sort of CTO you can narrow it down slightly. CIO is a more broad, and we use the title CIO. I mean, people still call me the CTO. People still call me the CPTO, the CIO, the group CIO. I mean, a title really doesn't mean that much other than, perhaps what others can immediately presume your role entails. But realistically, for me, it's just the mindset. As an individual, what do I look after? What is my responsibility? How am I held to account to my CEO and board? And that's realistically what the role is self-defined in many respects, as many roles are. And, I don't think that you can kind of pigeonhole anyone, but I do agree that if you think of it in the market sense, CIO is probably covering more governance and risk as well, whereas CTO is more focused on product and technology directly. But yeah, that's how I'd probably describe the difference.
Yeah, it's interesting because it makes it really hard. I think it's almost like every company has its own version of the role, depending upon what that company does. Certainly in a product company, it's much different than a services company, much different from a tech-enabled services company or a pure manufacturing company. And I guess, so one thing my kids ask me all the time, okay, what do you do? What exactly do you do in the role? And the way I explain it is that, we have to see where technology creates leverage and growth in our business and be stewards of that. And that includes obviously the innovation side, but also the guardrails, right? So, and that stewardship, I can see that evolving from the days when, you are actually configuring the servers, right? So go back to, 20 years ago when that's what the CTO did, essentially your email, everything, so much of that is managed by third parties or layers of abstraction away from actually hands-on. And now, it's really, how do you guide technology in function of the business? I get that far with my kids and their eyes glaze over. They don't really. Okay, well, what do you do?
Yeah, it's not too dissimilar to myself. My kids for years thought that all I did was play with technology, right? He does something with computer. Now, I like the term stewardship because it does actually describe what we do. Whether you are a CTO or a CIO, you're at that level where you are, shepherding our people along a particular pathway and direction, and providing that direction, but also making sure that you're delivering value to the business, that your team is delivering value to the business, and that we're growing our outcomes. And for us, because we are so heavily tied to the customer from our product and technology point of view, our product and technology is what's in the hands of our customers, rather than say, a manufacturing business or the likes. That means that we have that stewardship. We've got to make sure that we're looking after it, because if we fail, the business is impacted far more significantly.
Yeah. And you mentioned product a couple times. We've had a couple guests on the podcast who either are currently in or have been in a chief product technology officer role, or came from a product role into a CTO role. And I can see in a holding company where you've got retailers in different parts of the world, you can standardize on things like security as well. You should probably have data governance standards, but product is so nuanced by the particular markets. Do you also have part of the product function in your purview? Do you also how do you or do you not standardize that? Do you have kind of a different set of guidelines for each region, each market? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mentioned earlier, sometimes I get referred to as the CPTO, the Chief Product and Technology Officer. So there's that many times that my title's misutilized or mispronounced, or however you want to call it. But no, I do oversee the product and technology across the group. So product is within my remit. And we are pretty much operating with each of our markets where they're autonomous. They have their own chief product officer who joins in on a monthly get together that we have across the group, where we're sharing ideas, collaborating. And part of my role is to make sure that product development that's happening in say the North America is shared with South America and the Oceania and the likes. So we do operate independently in our market, so that we've got that flexibility and the pace of change. Different things happen in different markets at different rates, and they're all at varying levels of maturity as well. So we have the opportunity to get low-hanging fruit down into South America where their markets are far less sophisticated, you might say, right? So yeah, it's an interesting role actually as a consequence of that, and it makes it more exciting. Having both the chief product officers and chief technology officers across the group, all sort of coming together on a regular basis, led by myself, means that I get that visibility of what's happening on all of our assets or digital assets across the globe. And there's a lot going on, I tell you.
So in terms of responding directly to markets, like features that customers actively ask for or that are reflected in reviews and that kinds of things, how are there like 80% similar, 20% outliers, or how much variance do you have from just a feature perspective? Because these are all essentially they're mechanisms to digitally distribute or create marketplaces, exchanging of goods. Any crazy outlier features that you've seen just from different regions?
No, I think look, 80% is similar. There's no doubt, and that's how we leverage capability across the group, right? And it's an element of efficiency that we do have as a consequence of our size. But each market does have its little nuances. I mean, you're in the US, you've got 50 states, right? So, and then all the territories. But you think of all the state legislation, if we roll payments out here in Australia now, financial services is regulated at a federal level, right? And there's very limited state-based impact on that. Whereas in the US, it's a mixed bag. Every state's got their own rules, and the federal governors they had some elements of purview as well, and so it's a whole different game. And we have to, whilst we want the same outcome for our customers, we're playing in an entirely different landscape, and we have to cater for that, and that's what makes it more complex. You look at Brazil and Chile; they've got their own nuances as well, and the rest of it is legislative, no doubt about it. But we have to deal with that. That's just a part of the doing business in each of those markets. But it also makes it that much harder to just lift and shift and take product from one location to the next. But the beauty is that it is about 80% similar. Your customers all want to transact. Customers all want to pay safely. They don't want to be defrauded and all of that aspect, right? So all of that carries through. It's just how we go about it. So the same outcome, but the steps are different.
So a question, and absolutely right. In the United States, having each state presents a layer of complexity. Payments in general, there's a lot of complexity there. But I think and then maybe it's more of a just sort of general macro business question, but it seems like Latin America does a little better job in terms of removing the friction for customers around things like payments and transactions. Now, excluding things like imports and exports, where I lived in Argentina for about a decade, and there were lots of complications. Simply getting a laptop shipped to me, that kind of thing. But paying for goods within Argentina was very much facilitated by an ecosystem that comes from Mercado Libre with Mercado Pago and that whole ecosystem. Do you observe that as well, or do you think they're on par?
No, absolutely. I mean, this government structure is actually somewhat simpler than the US. You're actually probably one of the more complex sort of setups from a government's point of view, right? So, I mean, even in Australia, we have a new payments platform. You can transact between banks and transfer money just by theming to somebody's mobile phone number, we call it Pay ID here in Australia, right? Like, so theming money is between people is super, super simple and super fast, right? Yeah, sure, you have transact limits and all of that sort of stuff, and people are looking for an escrow service so that, you don't send the money before you get the keys and all of that sort of stuff. And that's the level of protection and that we offer in our products and why we have a payment service. Because, yeah, sure, it's actually really easy to transmit money, but how do you do it safely and ensure that you actually get the goods? And so Latin America, we will be providing the same degree of capability, and we're finding it far easier to implement in Latin America than we will have in the US, purely just, like I say, the complexity of the legislation over there.
Yeah.
So I totally agree. Argentina, you're transacting is far easier. Chile, Brazil, far easier. I mean, Brazil has a fantastic ability. You've got effectively the equivalent of your social security number, and you can get pre-approval for finance just on the basis of that number. Because banks have all your data and are able to go bang. There's no filling out miles of paperwork. Now that's a complexity we have in Australia, where you've got to prove your income versus your income versus your outgoings and your asset base in order to get finance, right? So there's degree of complexity in every country, and that's one of the things that we have to cater for, being a global provider of marketplaces.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And with us, essentially, I mean, our resources are global. It's interesting that you share the similar observation that in Latin America, there's I think a little less friction when it comes to things like payments and transactions. It's something I think the United States could probably learn a bit from. I don't want to talk about anything related to knock on was their industries be impacted by any decisions coming from the United States right now, but changing tack just a little bit to the topic that everybody wants to talk about. No one really wants to hear much about anymore because it's so played out. But I think we're still in the very early stages of what the potential of Gen AI, classical AI. We're in this. I guess I think it's an inflection point. I don't think anyone really knows what next year will look like, which is both exciting and terrifying. I'm curious, not so much from a product standpoint, but really from a way of working standpoint. How are you approaching that at a global level? And really how are you? I guess the best way to put it is there's a temptation to run fast, and yet everything is moving so quickly that it's like trying to jump on a train from the top of a car going 120 kilometers per hour, on a busy highway. Where do you jump on? And then once you're on, what do you commit to? Do you stay there? Do you jump back? I don't know if the metaphor is fitting, but that's what I feel like whenever there's a new model, there's something to incorporate, there's a new benefit. How do we institutionalize that in the organization, which takes time?
No, absolutely, man. But the analogy is probably not too bad. I liken it to no regrets, right? So you can turn things on in product that you were using already that are really, you have no regrets. You turn it on, it may or may not succeed in helping your people be more efficient or improve their lot in life associated with their their job, etc. But there's no regrets with that, because you turn it on, turn it off. You might pay a little bit of money. Usually it's X number of dollars per month per user to add the extra AI capability in whatever product it is. And so long as you've done your due diligence around, okay, well, where does my data go? Is there any possibility of egress, et cetera, then there's no real harm in many of those capabilities just being turned on. So they're in the no regrets bucket. The problem exists when if you're really investing heavily in a particular technology and the pace of change at the minute is so great that realistically we could make a wrong decision. We could place a wrong bet. And that's the sort of the juggling act, I think, that we and many other businesses will be playing with over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, maybe even short of that, next 1 or 2, until the beer versus VHS sort of scenario starts to play out and you see the dominant players really sort of cement their position in market, and the pace of change slightly comes off and it plateaus or something, and people could actually have a chance to breathe. I mean, there's billions being invested in these the generation of these models, and they're constantly changing. And you go down Gemini, Perplexity, Claude, you name it. Which one are you going to invest in and take advantage of? And then next week there's another one. So you've got to maybe do a little with a lot, and just keep the powder dry, ready to shoot for the moon when things sort of stabilize. But at the minute, I certainly wouldn't not invest in anything. That's definitely not what I'm suggesting. It's just that how do you pick which horse you're going to back at the moment?
Precisely. Well, and I think there's kind of two spheres, and I like how you put it. There's on the no regret side, I'm spending a lot of time and a lot of overtime playing with as many things as possible and just trying to find the value in it, trying to really understand how it can be applied in really small chunks. I think thinking about something from an AGI perspective, I think is probably pretty damaging if you're trying to run a business, because you've kind of think about the discrete problems you're solving and the incremental gains you get. And I think we're seeing that the low hanging fruit is getting picked pretty quickly, and that's on the no regrets side. That's on the I'm going to take these meeting notes, feed them to an LLM, and create a plan because that saves me 10 minutes of my time. The hard part is I think that's going to change how we work the same way, or in a similar way. Like the model I have for it is going from waterfall to agile. That was just a ground working culture, how we think about products, how we think about productivity, and how we approach complex problems. And I think my internet's a little bit shaky, so I hope
that is
Mr. Have you okay?
You're reading your 5.
Okay. So even how, and how we estimate things, how we document, how we create roadmaps, all of these things are the time scale is shifting. So maybe a result will be this chunk of work that we can feed to agents will be done in this cycle. And then this harder human cognitive lift stuff that's more ambiguous will still stay on 2-week sprints, but this other work can be planned a different way, or maybe it's done ahead of time. I'm not quite sure what it's going to look like, but I feel like that kind of major shift is going to impact in the similar way that embracing agile impacts software development. What do you think? And when you think about that, how do you think about rolling that out?
Yeah, look, one of the things that's interesting with AI and all of this tooling, and in fact, it's any emerging technology really that might come down the pipeline over the course of the next 5-10 years. One of the things that we always have to think about is what are the behavioral changes in people? Like, I agree 100%. This is it's a revolution. It's going from waterfall to agile. that changed the way people thought and the way people thought about how they rolled out a roadmap where, how you might pivot, right? The ability to pivot even when new information comes to hand, that changes the way in which you behave just generally in the workplace. It's sort of the way in which you put things together. And AI is going to be the same. You think about, actually, interesting conversation with the board recently about AI. And one of the things that there is there's still a stigma associated with using it, right? Did you cheat because you used it to compose an email or translate it or the likes? Like it's crazy that we still there are elements of the workforce that sort of thing. Well, you're not doing your job if you're using AI, right? Well, if I just it doesn't correlate, So I think the first thing we've got to do is get rid of the stigma, and I am seeing that in education and in the likes, because now teachers are actually saying, hey, use AI to help formulate your answers and establish the thinking, et cetera, et cetera. And so you move from just generating some artifact, because that's easy to do, but focused on the actual thinking itself and what value that you're actually contributing to the conversation with AI. That way, then prompt engineering, linguistics, all of that will be training and the like that will have to roll out so that people get to maximize the value that they get out of the investment in. But 100%, there's still, I feel, a significant stigma associated with using it to your advantage and your efficiency in performing day-to-day tasks, whether it be personal or professional. Have that problem, get that out of the way, and then I think we'll be well and truly on the way to taking full advantage of it.
Yeah, totally agree, and that's an excellent point. And I'm sure children, illustrate this very well. They're probably in the worst. High school kids, maybe just my view, because my kids are in high school. One will be. Are in a terrible position right now because they have all these tools at their disposal, but they're in a system that hasn't adapted to that use yet. So it's really hard to teach them, be curious, use these things to help learn and get the busy work done, because it does that really well. So you can focus on the hard things. But a lot of busy work, at least in the education system that I grew up in, there is a lot of busy work. That's kind of what leads to this kind of memorization and rote learning that you have to start somewhere. So it's I think it's a great point that and I certainly that's how we're embracing it culturally, is if an LLM can do it, you absolutely embrace it. That's not replacing you. That's just taking that part of your job and putting it to the side so you can focus on the really hard stuff.
You think about the the invention of the calculator, right? People would have thought it was cheating to use a calculator rather than perform mathematics themselves, right? Now, why would you try and add things up without using some form of calculator or assistance tool, whether it be Excel or the likes? You just wouldn't. Nobody bats an eyelid. Nobody shames you because you've utilized those tools to your advantage. I think AI will come full circle and have the same impact.
I heard something funny recently. I forget where. It was on another podcast. When electricity became widely used, there were all these news reports about freak accidents, people getting electrocuted and all these risks. And then now you think about, it's great. Obviously, knowing how to write code is incredibly important to understanding architecture. I could go on, but at some point, just the physical act of doing it is like it's like making candles. It's a great hobby, but it doesn't scale, and you're probably better suited to use light bulbs than candles in your house. And I think it's a similar kind of shift.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So, the last thing I want to ask you about is, and this is fascinating because everyone who's been on the podcast, I think, has such a diverse background. People come from aerospace, people come from, mechanical engineering, people come from philosophy, liberal arts, and even creative writing, all these paths to technology. And this makes it even harder to explain to our kids how we wound up doing what we're doing. Because there isn't necessarily a natural trajectory that says, you study this thing, and then you study this thing, and then it builds on and on and on. Part of it is because technology, I think, changes so quickly that you need to balance that with a certain amount of applied business knowledge. And you have to be multidisciplinary if you're in anything with product, because you have to understand human behavior to a certain degree. So tell me a bit about what was your journey like from, let's say, post high school education into the career, and then maybe one or two of your mentors that helped shape your view or your mental map of what it means to do what you do now.
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. I mean, we're going back 30 plus years now. This is you turning the dial for sure. No, I left high school and obviously went to university initially. I didn't actually complete that degree. It was electrical engineering. I didn't complete that degree because I moved to Australia. So I grew up in New Zealand and I moved to Australia for work. But I started off in designing control systems, electronics and the like. So, real engineering sort of roles, right? And I moved away from the hardware and into software because that was obviously where it was going, and computers are just everywhere now and the likes. And I could sort of see that was happening. So I moved into software. I did a whole bunch of consulting. I ended up then finishing a degree at RMIT here in Melbourne. And I also then did an accounting degree to build that business capability, right, to understand how businesses operate and the likes. And so my path has sort of been a bit, going from hardware, actual designing of electronic circuit boards and the like, and programming microcontrollers, all the way through to software development and engineering, with the advent of the web and online digital businesses. And now I obviously lead a team across the globe in an online digital business. So the journey's been quite varied, whether it be in finance, utility, defense, you name it. But it's hard to describe the perfect path for a career because I think everybody has different turns and twists and turns again, because it's all about timing and where you are at a particular point in your life. I had kids early, which meant that I didn't travel when I was younger. I had a young family, but it meant that I could actually sink myself into a lot of work. So I could focus on the family and the work, and travel would come later. And which it has. I've got adult children now, and now I have the ability to lock up the apartment in the city and head overseas and then enjoy a good holiday. But other people might have their children a little bit later in life and travel early, and so therefore their career is a little bit stop-start. I had that stability, I guess, early on, especially in my 20s, that allowed me to grow and build my capability professionally. But different people have different ways in which, and I always, to go back to your point about mentors, they come in at different times of your life. Early on in the piece, I remember distinctly a gentleman by the name of Michael Kelly. He was effectively my manager in a electronics manufacturing business, and he was great. He taught me a lot, gave me the confidence to grow as an individual. This is early 20s, and that really set the foundation. And I think about some of the impacts that he had on me throughout my career, and the focus that I now provide on individuals as well, especially junior individuals that are right early at the start of their careers. And I think, of the transformative difference that I can make at that stage. That's their foundation, and from there, then they can grow. And then you'll take on other mentors and the likes throughout their journey. And I really enjoy actually, a number of the people that I've played a key part in, staying in touch and seeing their progress. I've had people that I've worked with that have gone overseas and come back to Australia and, grown in their careers and are now executives themselves. And I stay in touch, and I actually really enjoy that. I get a lot of joy out of seeing that evolution of individuals. And I
Totally agree. Yeah, I think it's important to recognize or have, I believe, a mentor who's senior, and you can measure that in years of experience or actual years. I have a mentor who's 10 years older than I am, and I mentor somebody who's about 10 years younger than I am, who in turn provides a feedback loop that I'm learning from as well, because I don't see the world the same way that I did 10 years ago. There's some insight there too, and the world's changed. So it keeps you in touch. But I think that's a general practice I try to observe. But yeah, I absolutely agree. If you ever have the opportunity to help someone in their career with any kind of mental model or framework, anything that will give them a little bit of leverage going forward, it's great to see people take advantage of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's part of the joy of doing the job.
Yeah. And I got to say, congratulations. You did say you're a grandfather, so congratulations.
All right. Thank you. Yeah.
And
I have two little gremlins in the family. My grandson is nearly 3, and a granddaughter has just gone past 9 months. And yeah, I tell you, they bring a lot of joy.
Yeah. Well, and you can spoil them too, because you don't have to, you don't have to always put them to bed at night, so that, you can treat them. It's not like your own kids that you have to make sure you're rigid and disciplined with.
No, that's right. Yeah, we don't have to parent them. We're just grandparents. I love it.
Yeah. Great. Well, Jason, this has been a real pleasure. And, I wish you the best of luck as you continue, and, keep having fun with vehicles. I think that one thing AI will not replace is the odd human preference to hear an engine roar.
I won't be giving up my supercharger V8 anytime soon, because the sound it makes is absolutely glorious. So like I say, it is a preference. But look, I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for having me on your podcast. It's been great.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Take care.
No worries.
This was it for this episode. Join us next time for more real-world conversations between technology leaders. And if you like what you heard, subscribe to CTO2CTO. See you soon.